Until we get Andre, I just want to introduce here Kenneth Williams. Hey, Kenneth, thanks for coming by and joining for this. Maybe while we're waiting for him, you give us a little quick background of what your history with live sound and recording and stuff, and how you got to be an audio engineer, how you got into this stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I was in the Army band for, I guess, about 4.5 years, and I heard about Musicians Institute. Now, I had always planned to come out to Los Angeles, and I thought that would be a great place to hang while I worked on getting a publishing deal. That's really what I love to this day is songwriting. And I was a guitarist, and I used to be a vocalist, but as you can tell now, I got this little Louis Armstrong thing happening now. So until swing comes back, I won't be singing that much. But I came out and I met a jazz guitarist by the name of Norman Brown. And I met him through a good friend that lives in Chicago that is also a guitarist. Now, I'm from Chicago as well, but I'd never met this guy when I was in Chicago. But he told me, he said, hey man, Norman's an amazing cat. You need to know Norman. Norman needs to know you. Now, while I was in the Army, and I'll try to make this as short as possible until my brother Dre is ready.
I think I'm ready.
Oh, we got you.
Wait a minute, brother. You got some audio?
So my camera is, the sun is coming in the window, so it's kind of weird looking here.
We can see you. It's great.
Gotcha.
Well, okay, I'll shorten this thing up. Now, I tell you, Dre and I get on the phone and we talk for hours. And I'm talking about past quadruple hours, Yes. But anyway, now with this, I met Norman. And at the time I was living in a motorhome. I got the bright idea to get out of the Army. I didn't want to have any roommates. So I brought a brand new 26-foot motorhome. Now you see it all over the place, people in motorhomes. But that's what I came to LA in. Norman Brown came over to my motorhome, which I parked right outside of Musicians Institute. And we wrote a bunch of songs. Well, Norman ended up using some of those songs on one of those songs on his first album. And when he got ready to go on tour, he calls me up. Hey, Ken, I want you to go on tour with me. And I said, doing what? You don't need another guitarist. And he said, no, I want you to do monitors. Now, I had never done monitors. I had a studio and I hated to do anything audio related. I had another guy that I wrote with. He did all of the mixing, yada, yada, yada. But long story short, Norman said, hey man, I want you to go out with me because I love what you do in the studio. Also, you my boy, and I know that you will look after me on the road. And so my wife, she was my girlfriend then, I said, oh baby, what do you think? Norman wants me to go on the road. She said, hey baby, look, you need to go. And so I went. And I got, back then we didn't have all of the things we have on the internet. So I had books. I had a backpack full of audio books. And I studied, did a whole bunch of monitor solos during the tour. And that was the Patti LaBelle tour. First thing I went out on was Big Patti LaBelle tour. And Norman stuck in there with me. I finally got it together. And so here I am now. Next thing you know, I got a call from John B, which is where I got that platinum album back there, to go on the road with him. And I've been doing it ever since, and writing, producing some things, and just engineering.
That's awesome. I meet so many people that tour that seem to just like kind of get into it. They fall into it. Just somebody they know asked them to go. I meet so many more people that get into it that way than are that go through a school or something,
Right.
you know, and which is cool. And almost like, and so many people come to it through music, you know, that's why I came playing drums, being in bands, like working on recording stuff. But that's really like where my interest in audio came from. It's always like music first, you know.
Wow.
It was great.
Yeah.
But hey, Andre, could you thanks for coming by. Appreciate it. Could you let us know a little bit about yourself? How'd you get into audio?
I got into audio kind of from the title. I was a musician, you know, and I played the organ and piano, and I used to like to customize B3 organs, you know what I mean, to make them sound, you know, really hip, you know. And this tells you how old I am. We got into a point where keyboards came out, and everybody that had an organ no longer needed me to repair them. You know what I mean? So I had to learn keyboards and digital. And a buddy of mine said, "Hey man, I know you're not into audio engineering." He goes, "But the Institute of Audio Research has an amazing digital class. So you should go, you know, up to the Village, you know, in New York and learn digital." And during the time I was there learning digital on how to work on keyboards and stuff like that, I met a couple audio engineers, and we started talking every day, headed to class. I would walk past the studio, they would be in there mixing, and one thing led to the next, and you know, here I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. The IAR has been around for a really long time, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. What was their origin story? Do you know, like, were they first like teaching like it's not like music based originally, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, it is. Okay.
It was a small class that NYU started.
Oh, okay.
And so we were a small section of NYU, and you know, it was basically studio. I mean, almost like 100% studio. And it was crazy for me because I was the engineer at my church, and not knowing anything about it, you know, I would be faced with these problems, you know, at church, and then I would come back to class on Monday and say, "Hey, I had a problem. How do you fix it?" They would give me the studio version, and I was saying, that means nothing. You know what I mean? Like this is not working for me. And to give you an idea of the magnitude is that my particular church, I was the head engineer over 72 churches around the country. So back then we were streaming, you know what I mean? Like back then we were just doing, you know, it was just audio, but you still had to have a nice clean audio feed. It was a full band. It wasn't like a guitar and bass. It was, you know, an organ, a couple keyboards, you know, drums, full drum kit, you know. So I got thrown into the fire early, and I would say that's probably where my attention to detail came from, because I had so many instruments early in the game that I was trying to transmit over ISDN lines and so forth and so on. But that's kind of how it started. So I took all my professors to task every week, you know.
That's, you know, I see like a lot of audio schools, it's all, you know, it's all studio focused, you know, and I don't know, I used to own a studio and realized at some point that I couldn't make any money doing it. So that's where the touring kind of came calling. But I don't know, it seems like more people are kind of getting hip to that, schools are, and offering a little more education. But yeah, at one point it was just like reading that Yamaha book, the sound reinforcement handbook, that they had, like the Bible, you know, like so much information. But it was, you know, it was kind of hard to parse through and kind of learn. But it's good to see more education options coming up these days, you know, which is, I'm trying to do some stuff too. But a lot of audio engineers around the world seem to be sharing their knowledge these days, and obviously having this access to webinars, being online and stuff really helps. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited to talk about music here, and because we're trying to, when we work with music, we're trying to translate artists' vision to sound, to a mix, and it can be pretty abstract, you know. So, could one of you share maybe how you kind of approach this when you're building a mix? Do you think of one thing first? How are you thinking about music when you're actually kind of building a mix?
Well, for me, first and foremost, always the vocal, unless it's an instrumental, instrumental artist. People will be very forgiving. If you find yourself in a situation where you're coming in hot, that's what I like to call it, where you don't have any kind of prep time. Maybe you jumped off a late flight, which we're no longer flying right now, but you jump off a late flight. You go into the venue. You're starting from scratch. Maybe you got a foul, but like Dre said, when we started getting down, you didn't have a foul. You just had to jump in there, and hopefully one of your buddies was there. He'd take half of the console, you take the other half. But regardless, the vocal, whatever is the focus, i.e. With Norman Brown, it was his guitar. So you get that guitar up. People will be very forgiving if they can hear the principle. They want to hear what they paid money for. Then you build everything else up around it. Different genres of music will dictate your approach. And I think that going along with what, excuse me, what the title of this particular segment is, being a musician, which the three of us are, and other engineers may not be, and I don't think that is necessarily a prerequisite to be an engineer, but I think it gives us a different perspective and understanding from a working perspective of how, say for instance, you're a drummer, I'm a guitarist, Dre's a keyboardist. Well, we know you got the pulse, so if it's hip hop, or if it's funk, or I would say nowadays not so much R&B, because what they're doing R&B, I think is more of a hybrid of a kind of pop thing. But when you're dealing with funk or something like that, especially hip hop, you got to have that pulse. They want to hear that thing right up in here. So the genre would dictate vocal first, then the genre, like Americana. Of course, you wouldn't go heavy on the drums. You just wouldn't. You'd go and get the guitars or the fiddle or the slide guitar, whatever is most, I guess, what the genre is known for.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a good idea to think about whose name is on the venue, whose name's on the marquee outside. And
absolutely.
I remember right when I started doing this stuff, I remember going and someone I was supposed to be learning from, and I went and watched him mix a show, and it was a country show, mm-hmm. And he was just sitting there playing with the kick drum for the first two songs, and you can't hear the vocals, man, turn that thing up.
Wow.
And people were yelling at him. It's it was immediately the first lesson, pay, where you have to focus on something, and and the EQ of a snare drum doesn't matter as much as hearing that vocal.
There you go.
But yeah, I mean, even if we are focusing on vocals, do you think the genre, how far up you're pushing it is really genre specific?
You know what? For me, when I'm listening to a mix, when I'm mixing, I don't want things to be, I want you to hear everything, but I want it to be like a warm bath. I want it to be where you walk in, you sit down, and you experience the whole thing. The vocal is there, but everything else is built around it. You have some things that are behind the vocal, some things that are adjacent to the vocal, and they should all mesh together. I'm not a fan of the vocals 90 feet in front of the rest of the band. And I think that kind of stems from a lot of cats, perhaps, not a lot of cats, but cats coming from perhaps a school basis. I can't even say a school basis, but from not really, God, I'm trying, how can I say this? Not really understanding that all of these work together. The vocal must be present, but it needs to be like a soup. It needs to be, you can taste a beef soup, but you taste the carrots too. You know, it's not, if that makes any sense.
It totally does. But I think someone asked in the question box here, if I start with vocals, what tips can you give me to make it sound great? So I think when I'm thinking about vocals and really pushing them out front, I feel like you do have to start making room for other instruments with some EQ, maybe some like EQ cuts, strategic EQ cuts. I feel like microphone choice might be an important one. If you're pushing maybe a microphone that has a lot of like body out in front, it might be obscuring some other things. Do you guys get into a lot of like EQ cutting with vocals, or do you try to really keep it flat?
Man, look, you will find a lot of cats. Now, Dre and I talk about this a lot. You will find cats that will swear up and down that it used to be back in the day that you had graphic EQs. Now we have digital graphic EQs or whatever, and they'll be so proud that the graph looks flat. I have never looked at the graph and said, oh, wow, it's flat. It sounds so good. I will make that thing ugly as hell. I don't care what it looks like. What does it sound like?
What does it sound like? Yep.
What does it, but that is, one guy said, that is the worst thing that has happened to us with regards to being able to see the waveforms and look at a parametric or a graphic EQ all the time. It's like, forget about what it looks like. If you need to dive bomb 200 to clean it up, if you need to maybe put a shelf up at the top to just raise it up just a little bit, or you come in hot again on a situation. And I bring that up a lot because for me, that's been my experience in a lot of things, doing a lot of one-offs. Like with Badu, we do a lot of one-offs, or we were doing a lot of one-offs. So when you come in like that, you can't, or I don't spend a lot of time talking with the systems engineer about this, that, or the other. If I'm fortunate to walk in and hear what the act before us is doing, and I can look at the metering. If I can look at the metering from the console to whatever plugins and know that unity is prevalent all through the chain. Then when you look at your metering, be it your channels or your main output metering, you know that you're not looking at a lie.
Yes.
See, because if you are, then you got cats, hey man, you kind of hit my subs too hard. Well, hold up, dude. Is it set at unity? Don't push it up to +4, don't push it up to +6, put it at unity so that as I make my moves, be it cuts or boost, because EQs go up and down. They don't just do one thing. They go up and down. So you do what you need to do. If it's a Hollywood smile, if it's like, there's a good friend of Andre's and mine, Kenny Nash. And we were doing a show one time and we laughed after we got, I said, Kenny, man, yo, did you, over in Monitor World, what did you have to do? Because we were in a crazy room. He said, dude, I stuck 2 graphic EQs on my outputs. Did what I had to do on one, then did some more on the other one. Now, that may sound like unorthodox to some people, but it was so funny And the reason we laughed is because we both had done the same thing, because we weren't getting the results that we needed to get at the time. So do not, it's like they say, know the rules or know the laws, of physics. And then if you have to break some or do what you need to do to get it to sound the way you need it to sound.
Yeah. The biggest rule to all of that is keep the gig. Don't lose your gig over what you deem to be physics. I had and I still have, I have a decent reputation for being a great engineer, but I think moreover, a lot of people hire me is for consistency. Like when I was touring, it was because, if it sounds this way in LA and you hire Dre, it's going to sound that same way in Mississippi. It's going to sound the same way in New York. You're going to have a consistent flow. And so, especially after you sat and rehearsed, when you know what the show is supposed to sound like, your primary responsibility is to get that, to represent the artist you're out there for. Represent, make it sound exactly like, what they brought you on for. And so at that point, it has nothing to do, like Ken said, it has nothing to do with what the knob looks like. It has to all come back to what does it sound like, especially if you're flying in on a festival date. On a festival date, like with Boney or Jill or any of the people I used to work with, you get that sax hot and out there first. You know what I mean? Because he has an aggressive music, I'm always gonna make sure my drums are sitting right. You know what I mean? I'm gonna make sure you hear everything, just not so aggressive. But by the time we get halfway through the first song, where you're gonna be, it's gonna be right. But that's the big thing. Never lose a gig over what your graph is supposed to look like.
Yeah, there's a Duke Ellington saying, if it sounds good, it is good, right?
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I feel like so many of the decisions we make have to do with workflow in live sound. And it's you show up, because a ton of the bands I work with, same thing, one-offs, fly in, festivals, and you don't have time to think about the system engineering side of things. Just like plug and play, you got to go, but you got to be fast and be able to get your sound together quickly. And I think if you're able to do that, you're much more hireable.
You're winning, yes.
It certainly helps having like a console that you have a show built on and all that, and can roll in and just kind of like get all your inputs up in 2 seconds. But I think the skill of being able to like really get a mix going quickly is such a valuable one in live sound.
Man, I'll tell you what a guy said when I was working in a restaurant as a young buck. He said, nobody cares about the labor pains. They just want to see the baby. They do not care. I've never had an artist come up and say, oh my God, I bet this was a hard room to mix in, and I bet you are exhausted right now. No. They're like, yo, Ken, was my bumping? And I'm like, yeah, I had you. Or they like, yeah, Ken, it was rocking. Or in the case of a situation where there are certain times you will know without fail. You love it when people come up, because truthfully, Scott, and Dre can attest to this to any engineer that's listening right now, more than likely, when people finish up with a show, they're trying to get backstage, and I'm talking about the audience. They'll walk past us and they don't know if we're the light dude or we're the whatever dude. But let me tell you something. Let that joint sound crazy and they will seek you out to let you know it sounded crazy. So you just, I guess besides the people that come up and really recognize when they're hearing a stellar mix versus what they kind of always hear, some people will come, yo man, amazing mix. And they'll still be walking, I've had people come up before a show because the opening act or the act before it sounded crazy and say, hey man, that sounded crazy. Hey, I'm not that dude. I'm mixing whoever. Now, when they start, if it sounds crazy, then you come see me. And usually people will look over during the show and be like, dude. Now, with that being said, to all the young cats and women, I don't care who you are. I don't care who tells you this. And if anyone out there tells you they've never had a bad show, they are lying to you. Look, sometimes it's just not gonna be a win. It may not be your fault. It may not be anything that you are ever able to even put your hands on, because we fly in, we're on different rigs. Everything about the situation is different. It could be an errant mic, it could be whatever, but you just do the best you can in every situation. Do the best you can. At the end of the day, you'll probably have more wins than losses, but no, sometimes it's you're just not gonna win. Engineering is a microcosm of life. Sometimes you're just not gonna win.
So everyone wants to hear stories about those situations. You guys have any good stories about shows going down?
Oh my God. That's like 3 days worth of information.
Yeah. How about the day we met, Ken?
Oh, Dre, that was a crazy day.
Yeah.
This brother, I had finished up, we were over at USC, right?
Yes.
Was it USC or UCLA? And so Scott, I had to massage up a bunch of stuff, because now colleges are great gigs there, but more than likely they're dealing with a limited budget. They're getting whoever, in most cases, whoever bids the gig the lowest as far as the audio and everything involved, because that's not what they do. It's not like dealing with a promoter or something. So it was crazy. We were there for a long time, and I was walking away and Dre was walking toward the stage. I didn't know the brother from Adam, but we are brothers in kind because we're both audio engineers, all three of us. Now, you and I, Scott, we don't remember where we met, but we know each other from somewhere on the road. So there's a kinship of engineers, or there should be. So I see Dre and I say, hey man, I think I said like 200, 400 and da-da-da-da-da, all up in there, 630 is crazy. He said, oh, thanks, man. Now I was doing, who was I mixing? I can't even remember.
Now, I can't remember the guy's name, but his girlfriend was Halle Berry. So that's what I remember.
Eric Renee.
Yeah.
Can't forget that, man.
And Dre was doing Boys to Men, right?
Yep, Boys to Men.
That's right. Yeah. That's crazy.
I never forget leaving in front of the house and coming over to Monitor World, and she was standing there. I looked at you. I was like, wow. But yeah, no, that was a crazy gig, but it was great because, like Ken was saying, the kinship was, we stepped up to a system that was not the norm, and we knew it wasn't the norm, which is why we shared all kind of information. I know you think it might be this, but it's this. Don't take this to try, so forth and so on. And we had a great night.
Yeah, we crushed. Yeah, and Halle was fine as hell. And I tell you that's funny because Halle, and I love her to this day because I met her over at SIR at the Coke machine.
Yeah.
I was coming to get a Coke and she was going to get a Coke. Well, I didn't know the sister from nobody because she was dressed down. So I said, go ahead, my sister, and get your Coke. She said, thank you, my brother. She got her Coke, and I went back into the rehearsal room. So Eric comes in with Hallie. He says, hey, everybody, I want you all to meet my girl, Hallie. And I turn around, and then I recognize, oh, this Halle Berry. So he says, Ken, it's Hallie. Hallie says, we already met, Eric. Eric looks at me like, okay, and we laugh about it. So Hallie she would be about a hallway away, and she would be like, Ken, hey, Ken. And I'd be like, hey, Hallie. She was fun. She was really a sweetheart.
Yes. That's awesome. You know, it's cool meeting so many interesting people in this industry, like so many famous people. I don't know, like going through all the TV shows that we get to do sometimes. You know, it's just, I don't know. I love the excitement of it. It's just, it's great. But Andre, I wanted to ask you a little bit about mixing orchestra. You do the Philly Pops, and you know, I used to study classical composition a little bit in college, and I remember like reading this orchestration book talking about like violins and on the top of the orchestration and like double basses, tubas on the bottom, and trying to, you know, like realizing at one point that like, oh, you needed all these instruments to do like a full range, to create like a full range sound, which we now can of course do with like one keyboard, but like, you know, how, what's the experience like of mixing an orchestra, and how much of that type of thing are you thinking about when you're trying to really build like a full mix with the Philly Pops?
It's interesting. I mixed my first orchestra with Peter Nero. I mean, and it was really a crazy situation because I was on tour, you know, and I came home because my wife was almost due with my son. And during the week that I was home, I got a call from an event planner saying, hey, Peter Nero needs an engineer for an event. And I gave him 3 names, and some reason he picked your name, you know, give him a call. I called him and we spoke. And at that point I had never mixed an orchestra, but it kind of goes back to the topic of what you're saying about how being a musician, you know, works in your favor, because as a kid, I used to sit at home and listen to, I was into jazz and R&B and all that stuff, but I don't know if you ever heard of this. Chuck Mangione came out with a project, you know, called Live at the Hollywood Bowl. Feels So Good Live at the Hollywood Bowl, 72-piece orchestra. And I would sit at home and listen to this orchestra and hear instruments I had never heard. And I would say, wow, what is this? This is an oboe. Oh, this is a double bass. Oh, this is an English horn. This is a French horn. This is, you know, so forth and so on. So that night when I sat down to mix, and this was really crazy. This told me this is where I was supposed to be. We get there, we set up. The setup is in a museum, big marble room. And I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I set up the board, and then there's this this designer for this, because it was a big high profile event, who was saying, why do I see all these wires? You must move the wires, you know? And okay, so we moved the console to the back of the room, and then he goes, I can still see it, put it on the balcony. So we moved the console to the balcony. He goes, I can still see it, put pipe and drape up. So we put pipe and drape in front of the console. So at that point, my A1, I put on the console, and I sat in the audience with wireless comm. And I literally sat there and said, he's about to pick up his mic, turn it on now. Bring up the strings, bring down the oboe. You know, we talked that way through the whole show. And when we finished, I got a call saying my wife was going into labor. And as I'm running out the door, Peter goes, Andre, hold on. And I come over to him. He goes, I've never heard my orchestra sound like that, ever. He says, so, you know, I want you to come on and do the orchestra from now on. And I said, yeah, sure, whatever. Because, you know, you get that. People come, oh, man, great mix. I'm going to hire you, you know. I said, yeah, all right, whatever. So, you know, fast forward, my son is born. I go back out on the road for a little bit, but I had, when my son was born, I was out with Boney James. And I told Boney, I'll meet you back in Tahoe. but I quit. I'm going to be home with my son, man. I just got to do this. And he goes, all right. Now, in the euphoria of a son and, a new wife, the whole situation, I never thought about how I was going to get paid, So it was awesome that when I got home, I got a call from the Philadelphia Orchestra, because the Philly Orchestra owned the Philly Pops at that point. They were and they said, hey, we want to set up this contract and so forth and so on. And I said, okay. And, I talked more to Peter, but I will say this, and I think this is awesome on the orchestral side. When I first talked to Peter, he said, you know what, man? He said, I'm going to tell you what will always make you win with me. He said, is that you have to remember that this is an orchestra. He said, so you must always hear the strings, And I said, really? He said, I don't care what the orchestration, you must always hear the strings. He said, because you know what an orchestra without strings is? I said, what? He said, a big band. He said, I don't have a big band, I have an orchestra. He said, so you must always hear the strings. And for the 10 years, I just retired from the Pops last August. And for 10 years, I lived by that. You will always hear the strings, that, whether you recognize them as strings or not, whether they're the foundation, they're supporting all the other instruments, but you're going to always hear the strings, because that's the difference between the orchestra and the big band, the strings, and that was an amazing run. You know what I mean? I love it. I enjoy it. I still do a lot of it with other players, because we started a whole nother company of a new type of Pops orchestra. Because for those who don't know, the difference between an orchestra and a Pops orchestra is that a traditional orchestra plays classicals, the classics, and a Pops orchestra plays popular music. These days, pop orchestras have gotten away. They've made it a genre of pop music, but it's not. An orchestra that says they're a Pops orchestra should play popular music, meaning the stuff that we hear every day, in the tops, and the crazy thing is that most music we hear on the radio today is filled with orchestral music. You know what I mean? Or some sense of it. Almost everything has strings in it. You know what I mean? Almost everything has a different type of percussion instrument in it. You know what I mean? So I'm telling you, man, that was probably the biggest stretch for me, was coming from a jazz, R&B, blues, the whole nine, and then sitting there in front of 72 players and trying to figure it out. So I think that the thing that made it easiest is that Peter would schedule the first rehearsal without sound, so I could sit there and just listen to the orchestra. And then I had an idea of what it was supposed to sound like. And that forced me to I could read, slight, but it forced me to start picking up the chart, asking, Peter, hey man, I need the Grandmaster. I would get the conductor's copy. And then I could flip through it and read. At first I tried to read along, which was horrible. But after a while, I would take a song, sitting home at my desk, it's 60, measure 65, there's a trumpet solo, all the necessary notes. And then I would have my iPad sitting here and I would just turn pages, this song, first song, second song, third song. But, you can't really effectively mix an orchestra unless you know how to read, and I don't mean being a sight reader per se, but you need to be able to pick up a chart and look at it and know what's going on and when things are coming in and when things are going out and when they're supposed to fade. And because I believe that we as engineers are we're that barometer between the artists. Like, we're the ones that when they're having a bad day, we still make it cool. You know what I mean? And because they're not gonna always hit that note And if you know that, and that's a characteristic thing, then you know to tuck it at that point and find something else in there that's playing that same note, whether it be a guitar, a flute, or whatever, and push that up and ride it up and tuck that vocal back a little bit and then come back with it, you know. And that's just how it is, you know, to me across the board. But orchestra was my favorite at this point.
It's really cool. I mean, how do you even, like, how many, if you have a 72-piece orchestra, how many channels are you looking at on the console?
Probably double of that.
Yeah.
Because I like to, and that's a good thing too. When I first started, everybody had there was a mic over every 2 chairs. You know what I mean? So you have first violin, second violins, violas, cellos, contrabass, and then your winds, you know, and then your brass, harps, pianos. And everybody would take a really great condenser and put it over each chair, meaning first chair, 2 violins. And that was cool, but what the conductor was asking for, I couldn't achieve it, you know, that way. So I eventually, I mean, I did it for the first couple of years, and eventually I moved to clip-ons, you know, and people said, well, you know, it doesn't sound transparent. It doesn't sound like the instrument. And I said, well, leave that to me. I'll make it sound like the instrument, but I need the signal to noise ratio to be amazing. So that when I need strings, I have strings. When I need a harp, I have a harp. I would take a PZM and lay it in the base of the harp. You know, it would sound really natural. I would take 57s, believe it or not, for the French horns and put them behind them. You know what I mean? Kind of pointed off axis of the horn. So it just sounded like the section, not so much an instrument, but a section. And I would just, you know, chop it down one at a time. You know, the cheating thing is that, I don't say cheating, but I mixed that orchestra for 10 years. So when I walked in, I knew all of the habits of everybody, the intonation, who was going to do what, you know, so forth and so on. And I had a system that worked, and every string had a DPA or a point source on it, you know. And you even learn that, like for the first chair, I would do DPA because I needed articulation. From the third chair back, I would use point source because I needed body and warmth, you know, and just masses, you know. So but you start with that, and you get your strings tight, and you get them all cleaned up and everything. And I would mix from a standpoint of, I would take my VCAs, you know, or DCAs would be highs, mids, and low strings, you know. And I would take all my first and seconds, put them in the group, EQ that group, you know, compress it just a little. They get all the edges off the top to make it sound like one amazing voice, you know. And then toss a little verb on it because I'm micing the violin, the mic is this far. Nobody listens to a violin like this. You know, you got to have that air between it, and the air between it is what makes it sound natural. So I would always go in and put a little verb on there, and just enough to kind of bring it back, do all your highs and low pass and so forth and so on. And then that was my first thing. That was the first thing on the console for me, was highs, mids, low strings, and then woodwinds, you know. And depending on the type of music we were doing would depend on how I mic it, you know. Remembering it's a pops orchestra. So with a pops orchestra, I got a drum kit between the strings and the woodwinds, the flutes, and, you know, so it was crazy. So sometimes, you know, it would be like, man, I really need this big lush sound, and I'm just going to throw up some KM 184s over the wind section, you know. And at other points it would be, no, man, I need to put something like right on your horn. Like, I need for you to play right into this mic, you know. And I would do a mic on everything. The brass, I always did that. I always put ribbons on all of the brass. That was just a no-brainer. And that was whether you turned it up or not, or even if it came up for the solo, you know, because in a traditional orchestra house, I mean, my idea was always making sure everybody kind of feels everything at the same time. So even though the people on the orchestra level could hear this trumpet solo, the people up top couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
So it's a challenging situation, but it feels good when it's all said and done and it's opening night, you know. And that's one thing too. You almost never have to get thrown in the fire. I would get thrown in the fire maybe 3 times a year. Other than that, you know, we would load in. I would sit down and listen to the orchestra while my guys are building stands and, you know, mics and doing the input list and everything. The next day would be a full sound check rehearsal, you know, and then the next night we would actually open, you know. And that was when the budget went down, because before that, I mean, we would have like 4 days of rehearsal in every nuance, you know. But yeah, no, I mean, but kind of going back to what we were talking about early on, mic selection is everything. I mean, you know, because I don't like to, especially if it's a ton of songs that I don't even know and I'm looking at the charts, I need to know how it's going to respond. I really dig throwing up a mic, moving it around, and just not touching it, just listening to it. If I'm afforded that, it's wonderful. But if with the drums and the electric bass, you know, in a pops orchestra, you know, you're not always afforded that, you know. But yeah, no, orchestras are amazing to me.
Yeah, the last time I did an orchestra, it was like one of the only few times I've done it. It was with a full rock band that I tour with. Like something I was mixing it, like show was usually mixed really loud, and it was like with it wasn't with a full orchestra. It was like maybe a little larger than a chamber orchestra, but 20, 30 pieces or something like. Excuse me. But yeah, but it was so bizarre with having this really loud band, and the drummer was a monster, bashing right by the strings, and you know, and no one wanted like plexiglass up or anything because it's aesthetically weird. But yeah, as they went up, the orchestra mic'd everything in their normal fashion. It's like, nope, we got to put, you know, we got to get these mics right on everything, or else it's just never going.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and yeah, we actually had someone to mix the orchestra on a separate console for that show, and I had to fire him during rehearsals because he couldn't quite make it happen. And that's when I was like, you know, but we're gonna treat this like a close mic, like a rock show, and make it happen. And that's kind of what was necessary.
That's it. Make it a rock show with strings. You know what I mean? Because people forget that if they're coming to see that entity, not the addendum and everything added with it, you know, because we used to do that a lot. We used to do these theme shows of Elton John and, you know, so forth and so on. And that's why I would always lean back and tell their engineer, hey man, let me know where I fit in. You know what your show sounds like, you know, and I'll hang here with you until you're cool and you're settled in. I'll tell you all the nuances of our orchestra, you know, but just let me know where I fit in. And, you know, and that always seems to work best, you know.
Yeah, I concur with that. It's funny that actually all 3 of us have done orchestras, because I was touring with Ellis Hall. And for those of you that don't know who Ellis Hall is, if you've ever heard the California Raisins commercial, that's Ellis Hall singing. And phenomenal organist, which harkens back to what Dre started out doing, you know, with working with the organs. Ellis plays organ, plays guitar, and is a phenomenal singer. And he'd go out and do these tributes to Motown and different things, and tributes to Ray Charles as well. So like Dre, you would have a grand piano, but then you've got like the basses, you've got drums, you've got 3 background vocalists that have monitors. They're used to having monitors, and they're firing perhaps right back into the strings, who are used to just more of a natural ambience opposed to directional sounds coming at them. So I take the same tact and somewhat defer to the guy that's been doing it every day in his house and say, hey, You do what you do, then I'll come in and do what I do. As long as my artist is comfortable and whatnot, and that always seems to work well.
Yeah, supporting the focus of the music, right?
Yeah.
I think like and looking at orchestra music, I mean, you really do have to find the melody, right? And the melody might not be with the same instrument all the time.
And it moves constantly.
Yeah, it moves for sure, and chasing that around is critical if you want to like make sure people are really getting the feeling for the music, you know, like really getting the idea.
Absolutely. That I think is the challenge and the what I enjoy most about it. I mean, sometimes sitting in there, you know, looking at the chart and following it, you know, and at the same time, you know, just realizing who has the melody, you know, all the time. Because if you don't, your audience will let you know. You know what I mean? Because most times they're the classics, you know, and people know these arrangements. And if you don't realize that from measure, you know, 65 to 85, you know, everything is about the violas. You know, it really sounds like the bottom drops out of the mix for a minute. And it's really like you're going along and all of a sudden you say, whoa, what just happened? You know, if your gain structure is not kind of incredible, you know, it is, you're going to hear holes in the mix all the time, you know, because, and ultimately, and I always used to tease the conductors when they come in, you know, I would come in and say, hey, my name is Andre Houser. I'm the front house engineer. Am I doing this or are you? You know? And they would laugh. Oh man, what do you mean? Just turn it up. You know, just do what you're supposed to do. Now, after halfway through the first rehearsal, you know, they would find, can you bring up the oboe here? You know, can you bring up the, and I would tell them, I would say, if I have to do it, where does the conductor, like, what do you do? You know what I mean? And, you know, we used to laugh and joke about it all the time, you know, and so much to the point our conductor, he would turn and say, okay, Dre, you got this one. You know?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, you know, it always comes from stage, right? But as sound engineers, we do have to catch things and fix things. You know, it's live music. It's always going to be a little rough coming, you know, people aren't always going to play right on. I mean, you know, it's one of the things we have to do, right? It's kind of like massage problems or, you know.
Or confuse the issue.
Yeah, totally. but it's all about gain structure, right? Gain structure. That's like, when, you know, especially people like really starting to get into the sound, you know, like, well, what's the first thing we need to learn about? Like gain structure, like make sure it's all, you know, sitting in the right spot, your EQ, your whatever you're going to do, your compression is all going to work better if you have your gain structure sorted out.
Yeah. People, students, you know, I teach a class and a lot of times it'll be, if you only had two knobs or two things on a console, what would it be? And it would be gain and EQ, you know, because it kind of stops and starts there, you know. The gain, it gets everything up there and gets the detail of the instrumentation. And the EQ tells the microphone what it's miking. And you know what I mean? And it just works for me so often, you know, from, it may just be a high pass that just makes this thing work or not work.
Well,
you know what I mean?
What I would say with regards to the EQ situation, it's almost, if not almost, but it is, you actually have gain and gain, because an EQ is only a specialized gain knob.
Yes.
It is, you know, it will help you enhance or de-emphasize certain frequencies.
Yes.
You know, now with, so again, it goes back to the start of the conversation is, do not worry about what it looks like. What does it sound like? You know, if I guess the biggest thing would be if you could don't even look at the EQ. Don't even look at it. You know, if you know, like especially now for the new guys, at a certain point in time when you're new, you're figuring this thing out, and that's the natural part of it. A lot of cats will get into this, even if they go into come from school, they will get into it probably because somebody gave them a hand up. You know, maybe a friend of a friend, like with myself, I got in through an artist that I did writing for. But I said all of that to say that as you go along in time, like when Dre and I met. Now, Dre, that's almost what? Man, it's like 30 years ago, right?
30 years, yeah.
Come on, man. Now, even at that point, though, as two engineers not knowing each other, there was a common language that we could speak in, even in passing. And that was, hey, man, from 630 all the way down 200, yada, yada, yada. This is what's going on. These are problem areas. Now, that was in passing.
Yeah.
So you need first, look at the graphic EQ representation and learn those frequencies. Learn those frequencies because I go to my boy Kenny Nash. Mm-hmm. When Kenny's doing and Kenny's work with Dre and myself, amazing engineer, as well as Gordon Mack, and Dre and I work together. And sometimes on the comm, the only thing you get a chance to say is, "Yo, Ken, 4K, pull it down."
Yeah.
You need to know what you're hearing. Yeah. Because like Dre said, when you approach a mix, you bring it up, EQ and gain structure gets you there. You should be, in an ideal world, you should be able, once you got your gain structure set, you should be able to push all the faders up to unity thereof and have a decent starting point. Now, one of the questions we didn't touch on was about massaging the mix. I don't do static mixing. I've seen cats get there and the mix sound like garbage, and they're standing there like this. That's not what you have to massage the mix, because it is a living thing. It's not like if you got a MPC, that is a static thing. You know, you make your dynamics with that. But when you're dealing with players like with Badu, there is nothing on that stage that is pre-recorded other than the DJ with his records. Yeah. Everything else on that stage, the performance is going to be dependent on everything that has to deal with a person, a human being. People play different on certain days depending on what's going on. So I massage the mix. I know when, perhaps via the DCAs, when to goose it. If there's a point like, and this goes back to what Dre was saying, when you have the ability to read, and you don't have to be a stellar reader, but you need to at least be able to recognize basic patterns. Because not long ago, we just did a thing where there were charts, you know? So if I can pull up a chart, look at it and say, okay, like Dre said, this is happening here, then I know they want to get an accent on this downbeat. Okay, this thing is not happening from bar 41 through 49. Okay, might be an interesting situation, so I can kind of mute that or pull it back through those bars. You know, so those kind of things, for me, a mix is never static.
Yeah. And Ken, and that's when sometimes that kind of information is so needful, because to make something shine, you may have to pull all this other stuff back.
Yes,
You know what
sir.
I mean?
Yes,
Because
sir.
they're just open mics and they're just picking up noise.
Yeah.
So if you want to get the ambience out of it and make it punchy, you do need to drop that stuff back to achieve that.
Right.
So as much information that you can possibly get is is stellar. You're winning,
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like my fingers are almost always on like a main vocal fader if I'm mixing, because they're even if they're not quite singing, if they're singing at 95% instead of 98%, I mean that's going to translate, and it's going to hit your compressor different. It might even EQ might need to be different. So, but it's always like really, it's kind of like it's hard to separate sometimes when you're sitting at the console. Like, who cares what the fader, where it is on the desk? It could be at Unity or it could be +3 or whatever. It doesn't matter. So you need to like have the finger on the fader and hear and feel that the music is right, that it's at the right spot. But you always gotta be careful, because it's different. And then also throughout the set, going back to like not statically mixing, like moods of songs are different too. You can have a mood, one song could be a ballad or whatever, or change of mood, and that might require probably does require a different mix.
Yeah,
absolutely. And what you're saying right now, I'm working on a mix right now, and the young lady was singing, and she got so into the song. When she took a break and the backgrounds were singing, she was kind of into it, and she just said, "Oh yeah," something like that. But we caught that nuance, and that made the track.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We listened to it back. She was like, "Dre, was that me?" I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "Oh, wow." But it just gave it that stronger sense of believability. And I think that means so much. When your artist is standing up there, the audience needs to believe it's real. You know what I mean? So when you can let those little nuances, kind of creep in, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. My hand is always on that fader. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't care what else I have going on, even if I just take it and just throw it on a DCA and say, you know what, I got all these other pages of stuff, but I will never not be able to push this up or pull it back. You know?
Right.
Yeah, totally. One of the things that I always feel like people miss onto is like instrumental solos. It's like a guitar solo not being loud enough always bugs me so much, because we do focus on the vocals, and if you feel like you get the mix right and the vocals are really in a good spot, maybe you kind of like lose. Oh, there's a guitar solo happening. It's like
some guitarists that aren't heard.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't know. It just, you have to still be keeping track of where the music is, where the focus is happening throughout the song and throughout the set. So
yeah, absolutely. And if you don't know the music, the one thing that I'm always a parent of is, especially with backgrounds, I'm always quickly trying to find out who has the root, who's the root, who's the third, who's the fifth, who's the, whatever, you know what I mean? And if anything has to suffer, it won't be the root, because it kind of tells you where the song is going.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's weird if you have a group of background or a group of singers and you only hear the fifth or you only hear the third. You know what I mean? It's not weird if you hear the first. It's just not as pretty. But when you have something else, it just sounds wrong. You know what I mean?
You got the tonic. Yeah.
Yeah.
The tonic. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, and something you said about kind of letting like little things come through. The authenticity of music it's really important, and especially with the way people have been making records more and more, when you can just kind of cut everything up and make everything just sound totally perfect. It doesn't really sound like people playing music, and I think it was one of the reasons like why live music is so awesome. And like people love it. It's because you really can just watch people playing and it's real. But I think people react to those things, and if an artist I'm working with has a bad technical problem or something, and they're bummed out, it's something I tell them all the time too. Like, people in the audience are going to be excited that they were at the show where something went wrong, or it just makes it more real, you know?
Yep.
So they're not always going to be like, oh, the audience really wants everything to sound exactly like the record. They want to be a unique, you know, a unique experience, have a unique experience.
Yeah. So Scott, what do you know? Just asking, because that is one of the things that I see with the younger artists, that they try to take the, I guess, the studio experience and bring it live. And for me, and especially what I love about Badu is she seems to get as far away from what was happening in the studio as possible. And I think that's what keeps her, keeps people coming to see her, because on any given night, you don't know what version of Bag Lady you're going to hear or whatever, because it is, she likes to say it's an organic, you know, it's one living, how does she put it? It's a living, breathing organism. And so with having all of those players that actually are playing, it just varies from night to night. And there have been some amazing nights where you just know, wow, this will never be like this again. What do you think about situations where you go in and pretty much you're pushing up faders, but it's either mostly pre-recorded or all pre-recorded, and it's only going to be 4 minutes or 3 minutes, 15 seconds? What do you think about that?
I mean,
mixing.
One of my clients relies quite heavily on tracks. There's tons and tons, and you listen to their studio records, and there's a lot of layers. There are a lot of layers in the studio. Their producer he's Grammy award winning producer, but he's known for that kind of production, really like kind of lush, like tons of studio stuff, and not all of it is like how do I say it? Like natural sounding instruments. A lot of the studio stuff is like kind of reversed things, and you know, it doesn't really sound like you couldn't recreate it on stage unless you're playing back tracks. So they get into that, and that's cool. But they, you know, once that kind of floodgates started opening, they started relying more and more and more and more on the tracks. And then and that's okay. And you know, they're a great live band too. So when I'm dealing with their mix, I'm quite often putting the studio tracks right under what all like the live stuff is, because to me, that's where the action is, and that's what I want to hear when I'm watching them play. But then when their producer comes along, sometimes, you know, if we're talking about stuff, he'd think, oh, should we push the tracks more? I was like, and we don't fight about it. We get along great, but you know, it's always a point of discussion, like what should be. You know, he wants it to sound like the record because he's been in the studio working on these layers and stuff, you know, tweaking them out for however long. And to me, I want the organic experience. So it really, I think just the mix, you know, even if you have the tracks, just a few dB in the mix is really going to change how it's perceived.
Yeah, that's real.
So, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I think artists get too reliant on it because they feel like that's what kind of brings the power to their recordings, and they want to like have that power translate live, but it doesn't really always happen. So I think it's worth talking about with younger musicians, you know, and younger artists, because, you know, quite a lot of times what people are connecting with is not that. They're connecting with that immediate thing on stage that they're seeing happening live, you know.
I think you hit on it right there with the younger musicians, because now I'll say for myself as well as I know for Dre as well, we've been fortunate to work with some phenomenal musicians, you know, cats that like, I don't even tell people I play guitar anymore. I play guitar on songs that I write, but I guess the level of musicianship of the people that we're fortunate enough to work with is just amazing. And these cats come out even on a bad night and just crush, you know. I guess I would say like cats like Braylon Lacey on bass. R.C. Williams on keys, God, just bad cats. Wayne Lindsay, just so many bad cats, you know, you know, I think about like that, and so I guess that makes the difference when you know, and everybody comes into their own, and every generation has the people that they look up to, and everybody's got just like with us now. The three of us, we can sit back and we can talk frequencies, we can talk systems or whatever, and this is through experience, you know, and that is time. So I guess I'm kind of answering my own thing as I think about it. When they're new to the game, you know, they do what they do, and as they go along, they evolve and things change.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, to me, it's just, I mean, the audio technology is amazing to see what we can do these days with digital consoles, you know. It opens up a whole nother world of possibilities, really, you know. I mean, I'm like in one of my shows, I'm automating stuff. I have time code running and like like, you know, that's not really like possible for analog at all. But
remember when we used to go out with sheets of paper and have to write and color in the props?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then remember the little piece of tape that you put on the knob and then draw a line? Yeah.
Yeah, man. And having a bank of compressors over to the side, and because you and I, Dre, we've actually had to like double team a couple of shows where you might be on the console and I'm setting up your compression or something over the side, or vice versa. You know,
that was such a pain, man. I mean,
yeah.
Just a whole rack of gates and a whole rack of compressors, you know, and none of them ever had enough space to actually write the name of what it, you know what I mean? I'm like, oh my God.
And it never came back the same.
No.
You know, once another engineer got on it, we're all using the same gear. They're doing what they do. It never came back the same.
No.
You know?
you adjust the threshold like a tiny bit. It's gonna like be 4 dB more of compression. You know?
Yeah.
So we're highly optimistic.
Plus, like moving the gear around, you know, those racks were always just so heavy. It was like the biggest case, like trying to get a whole rack of like, everything upward gear.
I mean, I embraced the digital consoles strictly from the standpoint of, you know, at least you were going to be close to where you were. Yeah. You know what I mean? And even now, like when bands come into our facility, you know, I can pull up a mix and get real close. You know what I mean? Like I can go back to that, especially for ears. And it sounds crazy, but especially for ears in the sense that, you know, if my gain structure is right, I know that this guy had the guitar pen 2 clicks to his right ear, you know, and at least all that stuff is going to come back, you know.
Yeah.
And I knew eventually they would get the sonic value of a digital console, but the I'm telling you, man, that was such a challenge every night, you know, sweating, hoping that, oh man, I hope this vocal is going to sit where it's supposed to sit, you know, especially when you're an artist who wouldn't come out for sound check sometime, you know, just like, nah, this is our 3rd show. You should have it by now. And I'm like, okay, but are you going to do what you did last night? Yeah, exactly. You know, so it's, I love the new digital thing, you know. Yeah.
Well, you know, we did have a question here, and you know, if anybody wants to write in with questions, we're kind of getting towards the end, so pop them in if you can. I know, Ken, thanks for answering this, but Jesse asked, I'm getting into larger venues and be this artist, and many times there's a console provided by the sound provider. I see many engineers use flash drives and transferring show files into the console. The question is, can I use a show file on my console or other brands, or is it console specific? It is console specific, and even you might have to worry about, like with Digicodes, you have to worry about what version, software version you were using. So there, it does get very specific, and even I think, like, you know, if you have 2 Yamaha consoles, the files, you know, like an M7 file is not going to load on a, you know, PM5D. So, right. So that it does get very specific. You know, and one of the things I try to do with some of my clients is I try to have like a backup file. If I'm mostly running the show, I'm maybe an Avid. I will get a Digico file together just to be sure if we're doing a one-off somewhere and we're flying to, you know, we're doing a show in the middle of Italy or something where they don't have quite a ton of audio gear around and you can't get that S6L that I want, you know, like be able to get like another file up and going, at least get the show happening. You know, it's all kind of about being safe and making sure you can get the job done that day. Do you guys have preferred consoles you like using? Andre, what do you usually?
I like Midas, you
Yeah.
know, and I like Midas for the sound. A lot of people don't like Midas because it's difficult to get around on.
Yeah.
But again, having a client like an orchestra that I know I'm sitting on the same desk every night, I said, you know what? Let me just learn it. But I wouldn't suffer the audio quality, especially when you got 72 condensers. You need something that sums well. You need something that is just kind of over the top. So if it was about operation, I probably wouldn't have went with Midas. But when it came down to the overall sonic value, you know, and the warmth and so forth and so on, I went with that and I just learned it. It took me a minute to really sit down and go through all the nuances, but and now that I know, everywhere I go, it's like, no, just give me a Midas, just give me a Pro X, just give me a Pro 2, you know.
I feel like that would be a perfect console for orchestras, just like because they do sound really warm, you know, that classic Midas like warmth. I mean, obviously back in the day, that Midas analog consoles were the end all be all, you know. And I learned like on a H3K, you know, like analog console. I mean, I love mixing on the heritage consoles with Midas, but it's been a long time now. I mean, obviously with touring, it's so cumbersome, you know, making sure all the connections are perfect when you're inserting outboard gear, analog outboard gear. It's a lot to maintain.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
like
yeah.
Dre said, if it's a situation that his situation with the orchestra was a fixed situation. Every week it's going to be the same console, but for touring people, you need to be familiar with pretty much everything that is out there that is going to that you're going to encounter, especially like, say, for instance, festival situations. I'll use an example. I like a certain console, and I know what that console is. Like I love the VI series. I taught classes on the VI series, but unfortunately, they came to the game late.
Yeah.
At that point, you had firmly entrenched was the the PM series, Yamaha stuff, the Avid stuff, you know, and those were the consoles that, as you, like I say, I do a lot of one-offs. So I'm all over the place. So I need to have something that, regardless of where I am in the world, there's a likelihood of them being able to get it. So, like you said, like with the S6, I love that console, you know, but I will still sometime have to say, man, give me a profile, because they're going to have a profile. Now that console is long in the tooth, or I'm like, give me an SD7, SD10, something like that, because you're more likely to see those consoles. To the person that asked about the different consoles, well, I'm sure that all three of us have one little lanyard that has a bunch of thumb drives for all of the consoles that we have to deal with. And depending on what day it is, it's like Dre said, okay, if he can get a Midas, great. But if he can't, and he's got to use a Yamaha or then he's at least got a template to start with, you know. So I would say just try to have a thumb drive for every console that you think you're going to encounter. On your production writer, And for this gentleman, I don't remember if it was a girl or a boy, as you start the tour and you get the choice to say, well, I would like to have this, that, or the other. You put your first preference. I want the S6L. I want that. If I can't get that, then give me the SD7, SD10, or whatever, SD5. If I can't get that, then give me this, so that you kind of narrow it down and you know that within your wheelhouse, these are the consoles that you're most comfortable with. Now, being comfortable can make the difference between a great show and a show where you get sent home. I saw, unfortunately, a great engineer was doing the thing. I mean, that it has happened to me before. That what? This is not, I don't even have a file for this. And you're like literally counting down showtime. You come in hot and it's showtime. Yes. And you don't have a file. You're dependent on whatever was on the console. So as you go along and do more gigs, get better gigs, you'll have the ability to kind of dictate what you want, at least in the wheelhouse. You don't have to take whatever. Yeah.
Well, one thing I recommend to everyone learning this stuff is that you can go to the offline editor for pretty much any console, and at least kind of like get a sense for how the software is structured, and build a file, like get at least like your template going, so you have an idea. Because like we were talking about, it's about speed, and it's about like workflow and live music production. And if you don't have that speed, and if you're taking sometimes an extra 15-20 minutes is going to sink you. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So I mean, that's that kind of prep
fast,
Yeah. But yeah, like having that prep work done and like kind of just having a jumping off point for any console you're going to run into is a great idea. Absolutely. Yeah. Jesse did ask in the question box about the recording, and I will post this session. Anybody that registered for this webinar, you'll get an email in a couple of days from me about it. So it will be up. We're almost out of time, guys, but anything else you want to kind of bring up and talk about with music stuff?
There's one thing that I like to, as sound engineers, and I see it so much, to understand the vision of the music and realize that you're a sound engineer, not a producer. I'll give you two quick examples. One was when I first graduated from AIR, and I was on my gig, and I was an A3, if you will. You know what I mean? I was doing just the stuff just to get on the gig, and the owner of the company knew that I could mix, but I wasn't in that position. And so one day the guy who was mixing couldn't make it, and he told me, "Dre, hey, you're mixing tonight." I said, "Okay." And I jump on the console. Now we were doing one of these, it was a big band, and it was all the traditional Sinatra stuff and so forth and so on. And I jump on the board, I put my headphones on, and I said, "All right, kick drum." And he starts hitting the kick, boom, boom, boom. And I'm EQing, and I have it nice and crisp and fat, and it sounds great. And the owner walks up to me and he goes, "Hey man, hold on, stop. And I go, "What?" He says, "What are you doing to that kick drum?" And I said, I'm EQing it. And he goes, hold on. He said, "Turn it off." And I turned it off, and he told the guy to play the kick drum. He said, "Does your kick drum sound like his kick drum?" And I said, "Wow." He said, "That's not the kick drum for this music." He said, "You should have a louder kick drum than that kick drum, but it should sound exactly like that kick drum. This is a drummer who took time to tune his drums and make sure everything sounds right." You know what I mean? He said, "Now, if you go to the musical director and say, 'Hey, is there anything I should be doing differently?' That's one thing. But, we as sound engineers, we take what's given and we amplify it and we evenly distribute it around the room so that everybody hears everything pretty much at the same time and has that same feeling. But a lot of people feel like they step in and they're producing the show versus, you know what I mean? Yeah. Versus being a sound reinforcement engineer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one thing you'll see. A lot of people will lose a gig, you know what I mean? But let the musical director or the arranger or the conductor come to you and say, now we really need to augment this here. Or I don't care what you have to do, it should sound like this. And then you have the ability and the latitude to get it to that place. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I see a couple of questions. I'll try to touch on like a couple of them real quick. I love to talk. Anybody that knows me knows this. So, but I'll say the first thing I saw, was gain structure.
Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, like Dre was just giving an example, and I'll just use the drums. Like when he's doing the kick, you want to get the kick. And what I tell people is like, don't go all in on the kick because the drummer's not going to play like that. You want to get enough signal that when you bring it up to unity, that if they were to go harder, it won't take you up into red, which would possibly take you into clipping. So you want to get just looking at the metering, you want to get it like what about -10 or so, right in there, and that's about gain structure. And as you go along, because I take it that this is a novice that asks that question, as you go along, you will learn more of where you need to place things gain structure wise. And this is before any EQing or anything, gain structure. When it comes to techniques for training your ear, there are, I still have some CDs and I'm sure that they have them in digital form now. I just saw online where someone brought up something from Turbo Sound that does a sweep all the way from 20 hertz all the way up to 20K, and use those things to just get familiar. I wish I'd known that this question was going to be asked earlier. I'd have brought out the CD, but if Scott will, I'll get the CD out so that you can see it, because there are materials that you can listen to learn the frequencies. And you don't have to be 100% precise, because the other thing about frequencies, you're never going to hear just a pure 1K. It's going to have some other things in it, but you want to know what range to go into in order to make the adjustments.
There's a resource called soundgym.com. That's what I usually recommend to people, because they have little exercises that'll give you, you can boost the frequency and you kind of guess it. And I don't know, it's little games you can play. I think that's a good way. I mean, you can find old crappy graphic equalizers for cheap. Buy one, run music through it, start boosting frequency. If you really want to know what that 1K it sounds like, especially if you're going to be using them to EQ monitors or whatever, like play with that 31 band graphic EQ, just kind of boost that stuff. And that's always a good reference point. Those frequencies, like every sound engineer should really know those 31 frequencies, what those sound like, because there's such a point of reference. Like you're talking about the common language, like 500's a problem, and you know what 500 sounds like, because it's just, you always see it on that graphic EQ.
And for the person asking about parallel compression live, yes, I use parallel compression. Yes, it's a good tool to have.
Yeah. I know Enix asking a little more about gain structure. It's kind of complicated to talk about, because it really, to have a gain structure, really, what we talk about really is having your whole system running at a nominal level, where every piece of your system is running at a good level. Nothing is boosting or cutting too much. And you really start that with all the gain settings on each channel. And if you have all your faders at 0, and all your gains kind of set so that it sounds nice and musical and balanced. That's kind of what we talked about, starting with a good gain structure.
Yeah.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I like to say that gain structure on input gain makes the faders make sense. Because if you have poor gain structures, the fader has no reference. You know what I mean? If for instance, like when I do, I'll start with like you say, start with the kick drum and get it at a certain level and make sure everything, as a novice, I will probably make everything not exceed that gain structure, you know, or that, I'm going to get away from that term real quick, but if I'm turning the gain up on the kick drum until it's at -10, then everything else is going to be around that range of -10, you know, so that if I threw all my faders up to 0, everything will be at an equal level and you would hear everything, you know. Now, as we know, a lot of times you can't get that -10 out of a hi-hat, you know what I mean? Because at a certain point, your gain structure becomes what the song sounds like. It becomes, if I threw all my faders up to 0, this song would almost mix itself to a certain point, you know? And I think that's kind of the thought process of it, you know, that outside of the system parameters, you know, when you're just looking at inputs, you know, that allows everything to kind of shine through the way it's supposed to, and it makes the faders make sense. Without a gain structure, the faders are a good guess. Yeah. You know.
And for me, again, I would say to anyone, use these. Yep. Do what sounds good. Do not be swayed nor intimidated by anyone that wants to, that thinks your EQ needs to look a certain way. It does not need to look any kind of way. It needs to sound a certain way. And when people, as engineers, the thing that and I'll say this, on the level that Scott, Dre, and myself are on, pretty much everybody can mix. Pretty much. Now, there's some people out there faking and jaking, but that's a whole nother thing. Yeah. But pretty much on this level, everybody can mix. So when they call Andre Houser, they call Andre, or they call Scott Adamson or Kenneth Williams, because they know with Ken, you're going to get a certain thing. You're going to get a certain thing with Ken. You're going to get a certain thing with Scott. Now, this may be administrative. It may actually have nothing to do with your mixing. Sometimes it's about your ability. How do you get along with people?
It's often that way, right?
Oh, man, speak on this. When you speak, do people believe what you're saying? Are you that BS dude, or are you that dude that they know, hey, if I tell you I can't get it any higher, or I can't do this, that, or the other, then the understanding is within the context of where we are. You know, because what we really do, the three of us or any engineer worth his salt, what we really do is allow the artists the comfort to do what they do. See, they don't worry about what we do because they have a belief and a comfort level in our abilities that allows them to be free to do what they do. And if you do those things, you are winning. Now, you ain't gonna win all the time. Forget about that. Anybody that tells you that they do, they are lying to you. They are absolutely lying to you. Dre and I have laughed sometimes, and I said, Dre, I think I need to go in therapy now, because oh man, I'm trying to find my butt because it just got chewed off on this last gig. You know, that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, it is in anything that you do. There are going to be days that you win, days that you lose, but you hope that the winning days are going to outnumber the losses. And it is not a loss if you gain some knowledge. Wisdom is nothing other than a whole bunch of mistakes put into encapsulated that you just don't make again.
Yeah. And you remember, I had a date up at Paisley Park, right? Mm-hmm. And a friend of ours, who I won't even mention his name, I know who we're talking about, got the call to do Prince, and he went up and he's sitting in rehearsal, and Prince told him, "Hey man, turn the guitar up." And he turned it up. He said, "Turn it up some more." He turned it up some more. He said, "Turn it up some more," and to the point that it was screaming. Wow. And they finished the song and they went on to the next song. He said, and after that song, Dre, I pulled the guitar back to Unity and we went through the next song. He said, the next day I woke up and I had a check and a bus ticket under my door sending me home, you know? So dig this, fast forward. I get the call to do Prince and I'm sitting there and we were at a club up in Minneapolis. And they said, "Hey man, Prince is probably gonna be stopping by tonight." I said, "Okay." And he had already heard me mix music earlier that night. So we left Paisley Park. We go over to the club. We're sitting there. I'm mixing. And he walks in and somebody puts their hand on my shoulder and I turn around and it's him. He starts smiling. Now he takes my hand. He puts it on the guitar fader. Now there's a guitar player playing right now. And he pushes it all the way up. You know what I mean? And then he walked up front, unplugged the guitar player, plugged in his axe and just start playing. You know what I mean? Now, Ken, what do you think? I didn't touch that fader for the rest of the night. I mixed around it, but I did not touch that fader. You know what I mean? And the next week, I got a call to come back. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. So that's what I'm saying. When you're representing, know if the artist says, this is what it's supposed to be, that's what it's supposed to be, you know?
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of like, you're giving the artist the ability to kind of like do their thing. I had a client, one of my clients, we were doing the gig in London. It was one of their first time doing like a big, it's like 10,000 people there, like a pretty big gig. And like, they were just so nervous and they were, I saw them before the show and well, whatever it didn't really like look very good at all. And like, they're pretty much having a meltdown. And, but after the show, it all went fine. Of course, they got out on stage, but after the show, she came up to me and was like, "You know what? Before the show, when I was like trying to get on stage, trying to get myself there, knowing that you were out there was the thing that got me, was the thing that got me out on stage and feeling like I was going to do a good show. It was all just being comfortable, knowing that it was going to sound the way I wanted it to sound. So, that's a powerful connection,
It is.
Now I'll say this with regards to that, not to be the wet blanket, but for me, there's just certain things I'm just not going to do. If it doesn't, I worked for an artist before that it was so loud coming off the stage that it was just like the only way. And like Dre said, which is a clue when it comes to mixing, and this is a good clue. Whatever is the loudest thing, in order to have a good mix, you got to mix up to that. Now, ideally, that should be the vocal, because what I call the vocal, that's the money channel.
Yeah.
That's what ensures that you get that direct deposit or that little check at the end of the night. That's the money. They didn't come up and you look on the marquee and it says, Boo Boo the fool that's playing the vibes. It's like, who is the vocalist? That's the person they paid to see. So you bill for that. Now, I mean, for me, I always I never have I gone into a gig, any gig, I don't care what they were paying, and I didn't care about the mix. I'm always doing the best job I can. So if it does not sound stellar, or if it's one of them nights, believe me, it's not because I wasn't trying, but there's certain things that I was with a big act one time, and the manager wanted to come up and push the vocals like 40,000 miles above everything else. And Dre and I laughed about that because he knows who I'm talking about, but I just couldn't do it. And I tried to explain because at that point, we weren't using arrays. It was speakers on the deck. So now, imagine if the vocals were slamming and I'm at the back of the house under a balcony. What do you think was happening to that front row that was right there, less than 10 feet off of the speakers? They're getting slaughtered. Now, there's a way to do everything. And I simply said, I can't do this. I won't do this. You know, not to be a wet blanket, but you are there to be of service to the music, you know. And I always try to do that. And I've been fortunate that for the most part, I've always worked with artists that they wanted to be of service to the music too. We get called for the artist comfortability and to mix a good show. You know, you want people walking out of there feeling like, wow, I was in an experience. I just had, I'll say this, you want them thinking like this. Once you give a man that's been drinking dirty water all his life, if you give him a glass of clean water, you can never give him that dirty glass again. There's a lot of people still today, they don't even know what a good mix sounds like.
Absolutely.
They don't know. It's like you don't know until you know. But once you know, anything less, you're not happy with it.
Yeah. You know, when people say, oh, you know, most people can't really tell what a good mix is anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I disagree. People,
thank you, sir.
When it's right, people feel it, you know.
Oh, believe me, they do.
Yeah.
Believe me, they do. Yes, sir.
And it's when all those pieces come together, all that work, the whole thing sounds like music. And
Yeah.
it, you know, that's when it gets, but it's hard to get that. It's hard to get music to sound like music because we're doing all this weird things, putting microphones, putting transducers up and like routing it through all these speakers that aren't perfect, you know, like, you know, someone did ask earlier, like, where do we see front of house mixing technology? To me, it's all about speaker systems becoming better and better and better, and to where you're like little things you do on the console, you can really hear, you know, everything, all the details. So, but you know, it's like, I don't know, when you do all these things and you really kind of get something sounding like music, then it connects with people.
Yeah.
There you go.
And Scott, I think both you and Dre will agree. There are days that we do shows and people come up and they say, oh man, it sounded amazing. And I remember one time, Dre, that was you that told me. I believe it was you that one guy came up one time, some show, and he was like, man, that sounded great. And I said, oh man, well, you know, if I could have did da-da. And my friend stopped me. Yo, you don't ever tell a man he didn't have a good time. If he comes up and tells you he had a good time, he had a good time. Now, we always strive for perfection in an imperfect world. Most of the places that we mix in, big arenas that are built for sports and yada, 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 those things weren't made for what we do. So we're trying to do a perfect thing in an imperfect place, you know, but you do the best you can. You try to learn from every situation. And I'll take notes, you know, I mean, we all have smartphones now. So you can set up like what Scott was saying. There is a method to how he sets up. I'm Badu's production manager as well as her front of house engineer. Now, everyone on the team, they know how I get down. They know how I like to do things. So we have a very structured way that we do things because it allows us to move through all the instruments quickly and not miss anything. I'll say like with Badu, a lot of times we'll be at front of house. I'll be at front of house and Mr. Nash or Evan Lineberry, will be at monitors, and she'll send up to us, hey, Common's coming out, or Most Def's coming out, or da-da-da-da. Now these goes into things of planning. I know that regardless, I'm sorry, I need to keep a certain amount of channels just open. These are my go-tos, and the stage manager, Mike Skinner, an excellent engineer as well, knows if we got to add something, this is the order that we go in. We got Mike 1, 2, 3. Most Def's coming out, give him Mike 1. Well, Common's coming out too, give him 3. You know, these kind of things. You try to prepare for any eventuality. And as you go along and you acquire more skills and more learning and experience, you'll build for that. I'm sure we all do that. We have our go-to mics. We have as many contingencies as we possibly can have set up depending on the individuality of the artist that we're working with.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And the times you're not prepared, like you said, are going to make you prepare the next time, because that feeling of being in a gig and it's like, oh, this is going to be bad. And you're like, if I just prepared a little bit. Yeah. Well, you know, I think that's a good place to leave it, guys. We've been talking for a while. I really appreciate all the time you guys and all this experience you guys are sharing here with us today. It's been awesome to talk with you guys. Thank you so much for coming by, Kenneth and Andre.
My pleasure, man. I enjoyed it. Hopefully they got something from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said to everybody, we'll have this reposted in a couple days at theproductionacademy.com, but I'll send everybody a link here soon. But again, thanks guys. And
you know what?
Yep.
One other thing. I'm giving away.
Love it.
Copies. You gotta love it. You gotta love it, baby.
Love it.
So anybody that wants one, reach out to Scott. I'll send you one. Yeah, it's my company. And I tell you what, read it. Nobody cares about the labor pains. They only want to see the baby. That's it.
There you go, man.
All right.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's Scott at theproductionacademy.com. Anybody email me and I'll put everybody in touch. All right, thanks again, guys, and hopefully see you on some gigs soon.
Yeah, man. We'll figure out where we really know each other from.
Absolutely. All right.
Right.
Thanks for everybody for coming by, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Take care. Bye.